Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is going to be another, sort of quasi-TBR type of video about a particular genre, that is non-fiction books that I am most excited to read at some point. I'm very bad about reading non-fiction, so it's definitely not a focus on the channel. I think at this point I've only reviewed like 2, maybe 3 non-fiction books at this point, so it's definitely not a major thing for the channel, but there are, a solid handful of non-fiction books that I do want to read. I initially made a version of this list like years ago, but never wound up making it. I want to say it was like in 2023, maybe 2024 or so, I forget which year, it might have been both years really, where I made a bunch of videos about, horror books that I wanted to read, books that were like 1,000 pages long that I want to read, sci-fi books that I want to read, or something like that. I've made multiple of these types of videos over the years, but it has been a couple years since I did any of them, and it's been a couple years since I originally composed this list, so, I somehow haven't gotten around to the nonfiction or even historical fiction yet. I had to recompose this list, and I might recompose a historical fiction books list that I want to read in the future, at some point here on the channel, because I'm running out of video ideas, to be completely honest with you. But in scrambling to come up with a video idea, I decided to revitalize this one and compose it. So this was originally going to be top 5 nonfiction books that I want to read, and today I decided to actually make it a solid 7 instead. There were a couple extras that I wanted to include in here, and a couple of these are a little bit bigger, multi-book types of items, hence the 7+ in the title, but all of that is just introduction that we don't really need to get through. So if you're skipped all of the introduction to actually get to the first entry on the list, we are immediately cheating, because it is it's a book, but it's 6 volumes, and that is, oh good grief, if I could even grab onto it in any way that is useful. The Decline and Fall, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. Is that his name? Gibbon? Yeah, it's Gibbon, not Gibson. This is definitely a nonfiction series, I guess you could say, because it is multiple volumes, but it's one that has been on my list for a very long time. I can still remember seeing, there's a different editions. I think they're more leather-bound editions of these books, where on the spine you'll see, a Roman column, basically, on one of them, and that, degrades and gets more destroyed over time, basically. The motif of that was carried over into the reversible dust jacket artwork for the Sun Eater Broken Binding covers, for example, so you kind of understand where that theme came from. And that set of books in my library back many years ago when I first saw them was just like, oh, that's really cool. And since I do enjoy history and stuff like that, particularly more ancient history of a much older cultures, we should say, and of course Rome being, arguably the greatest or largest empire on earth. I mean, maybe not arguably the largest, but one of the most impactful in the Western world, especially. It's a slam dunk for me to want to read more about the history of the Roman Empire, and specifically the fall of it. That would be pretty neat. It's just I've not ever gotten around to prioritizing it, largely because I'm bad at prioritizing non-fiction books. And as a little bit of proof for how bad I am at prioritizing non-fiction books, our second item on this list is again cheating, because it's 3 entries technically, and could also be a 4th depending on how you think of it. That is The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This is an experience from a little bit more recent history, we should say, of course, because it is involving the Soviet Union, the horrors of the 20th century, we should say, and these were actually some of the earliest books that I purchased for myself back when I was starting to get back into reading in 2021. Some of my early reading that year when I was getting back into it was more nonfiction stuff, and specifically of this kind of nature, and I did pick these up, intending to read them, and then I got involved in a more sci-fi fantasy side of BookTube, basically, later in that year, and so I haven't read very much nonfiction. But this is one that I really want to read because I'm very curious about the experience that Solzhenitsyn had. And Gulag Archipelago specifically is also pretty interesting because there is this unabridged version, which is the 3 volumes, but there's also an abridged version of these that Solzhenitsyn himself actually oversaw, basically. So it's like officially approved abridged version. And I have heard from people who have read both the abridged and the unabridged that the abridged version is arguably better to read because you're not going through as much of all of this because it's several hundred pages per book and you're instead just getting it in one volume. Basically, it's all condensed. You're getting all the major, thematic material and all that kind of stuff in there still. But I am curious to read the unabridged version, and then I don't own a physical copy of the abridged version. I would like to eventually here soon. But if I do get around to reading this, I want to read the unabridged and then read the abridged. So that I can make my own determination on that, and as a booktube channel, maybe even be able to make a recommendation as to whether one should read the abridged or the unabridged if they don't care to read both, basically. So that's the second option. And I'm coming to realize that basically nearly every item on this list is actually multiple books. It's actually funny. I'm very heavily cheating here. The third option on this list is also 2 books, and that is because it is the 12 Rules for Life books by Jordan Peterson. These have been on the back burner since 2021 as well, basically, but I just haven't read them quite yet. I do actually plan to get to 12 Rules for Life a little bit sooner than later at this point. I just don't have it really nailed down on my schedule at this point quite yet. I have read We Who Wrestle with God by Jordan Peterson. I did do that pretty recently, and by recently I mean I actually reviewed that like a year ago at this point, and I really enjoyed that book. Because I've always enjoyed Peterson's psychological insight, particularly when it comes to stories. Some of his early lectures that he would post online, some of the ones about like personality and its transformations, I think the series was called. Things like that were just very insightful and interesting, actually. And so, these are the books that he's most well known for, basically. And so I do want to read them. Yeah, they're on the list, and kind of as a subset honorable mention, I'm going to include Maps for Meaning in there, another one of those early series that he did do lectures about, because he did lectures on this book to make the book more condensable and understandable, because as far as I understand, Maps for Meaning is very dense. So maybe it won't be, an immediate or upcoming read, especially since Peterson's the way he writes is very much in the way that he speaks, and that can sometimes be hard to follow in a text format as opposed to an audio format for me. So we'll see. Maybe I end up reading the book alongside lecture series or something like that. I don't know. But I do want to read a little bit more of Peterson's work, because I again did really enjoy We Who Wrestle with God. So I'm looking forward to those. The next one of these is a little bit different in that instead of covering history or more of a present type of situation, we're looking a little bit into the future, and that is called Nuclear War: A Scenario by Annie Jacobson. A good friend of mine read this early this year. It might have been late last year, but it was somewhere in that period of time, if I'm not mistaken. And apparently the book was really, really great. I mean, it gave her some really bad anxiety because it is a scenario for how nuclear war could likely go down in some sense, right? But that could be maybe fun to read, right? But regardless of any of that, it apparently has a lot of really interesting and informative information about a lot of nuclear material and that kind of thing. So that's something that would be definitely interesting to read. Around the time that my friend did read the book, this book was really, really, really cheap on Amazon. Like, I think I got this for like, what, $8 or something for the hardcover. So I was like, that's a very easy pickup. So there's that. Annie Jacobson has also done a lot of other stuff that seems interesting to me that I would like to read. Plenty of it that I own digitally, whereas this is the only one that I own physically, but that's the one that I'm including on the list, largely because I actually own it physically. Next up, we're going to be completely changing tack to a very different realm of nonfiction, and that is The Anatomy of Genres, How Story Forms Explain the Way the World Works by John Truby. So, this guy also did another book called The Anatomy of Story, so it's probably a very similar thing, except looking at storytelling specifically, and this time he's broadening that out to or maybe specifying it, actually. It could be taken either direction, really. Just to talk about multiple different types of genre. You can see on the cover there the different types of genres that are on there. There's one that my mother gave to me. I don't remember when, actually. I think it was a Christmas gift a couple of years ago. I might be misremembering the exact details of that, but being somebody who has very, at best, very cursory knowledge of how most genres and stuff actually go, wanting to learn more, this is something that I am very curious to actually read. I am admittedly of the Christopher Rocchio school of genre isn't precisely what we tended to think of it as today, but even so, working from a foundation of the modern thought behind what that is, isn't a bad thing at all. And given that I basically work in the book industry, working for Christopher Rocchio, having a little bit more knowledge about just storytelling, genre, this kind of stuff in general, would be something that would be better than not. Of course, The Anatomy of Story by the same author might be something that is also worth reading if I get to this one at some point. So that is entry number 5. Next up, we're going to talk entry number 6, which again is pretty much cheating. That is because it is a much more broad category of presidential biographies, basically. United States president biographies. I own a handful of these. Definitely, I own Washington and Grant by this author, who is his name, Ron Chernow. And then I have the John Adams and Harry Truman. Is that his name? Harry Truman? The Truman biographies by David McCulloch. And then I also own a solid handful more presidential biographies digitally, and there's a lot more that I have in a wish list on Amazon to keep track of. With regards to purchasing more, many more of these that I haven't bought yet. Like there's a particular biographical trilogy about Teddy Roosevelt that looks really good that I just haven't pulled the trigger on buying yet. There's just no small amount of biographies, quite frankly, that I am interested in reading, but specifically presidential biographies with the United States of America would be something to read a lot more about, to have more insight to the lives and thus also, the decisions of various of those presidents and their administrations, and particularly in the early era of the country, is something that's actually really interesting to me, and something that revitalized the idea of I should actually go ahead and read the Washington biography, was having watched the Young Washington movie recently. Was that last month, basically? Just really curious to learn more about some of the lives of some of these presidents. So that's just a broader category of nonfiction that I want to read, is biographical stuff about those particular figures. Next up is going to be the last option, is going to be one that I only own digitally at the moment, just because there aren't really physical copies, at least not of the hardcover versions that I want. Those are kind of hard to find. But I do own The Story of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant. And this is also another series that has kind of been sort of on my radar for a surprisingly long time, because again, history, and especially more ancient history, is something that I'm really into. Even though The Story of Civilization does cover thousands of years of history and stuff like that, this is something that has really intrigued me just because of all the different topics that 11 different volumes go into. So it's a very big project. It's not like a book that's trying to go over all of human history. It's 11 books that are going over different parts of it, different regions of it, mostly dealing in the Western world again. But even still, I really find the composition of these books really interesting to me. Will and Ariel Durant basically traveled for decades and spent decades writing these books, going to all these places firsthand and learning from those people, being in the areas and writing, like I said, over the course of decades, these 11 volumes. So though this history is predominantly covering a lot of the West, I do really want to try reading The Story of Civilization at some point, because that seems like it would be really fun. But that is going to be all 7 primary entries of the list, even though basically all of them were more than one book. I think only 2 of these entries were only one book. Way to go, me. I do also have a couple brief honorable mentions to go over here at the end. Not anything that I'm going to be showing super in depth here, just more general categories and topics and stuff, right? So there's the factor of authorship books, the cover of that's not going to be easy to see. The Elements of Eloquence is just one that I happen to have to show off as an example of this. Generally the types of books that pre-established authors have written about their writing process or how to write or stuff like that. Also things like this that are a little bit more technical. You could consider them somewhat along the lines of the anatomy of genres, just things to learn a little bit more about that, both for my own writing and also to help with my work under a different author. That would be something that would just be kind of nice to read a little bit more about, generally speaking. There's 1.5 million other types of biographies and autobiographies that I want to read other than just the presidential ones. The presidential ones were just the ones that I wanted to include more specifically in this video. There's also plenty of other like classical writers, philosophers, similar type of stuff like that that's more out there that I want to read, you know, things like Plato or whatever. That would be interesting to get into. I don't know how much of Plato's work would technically be considered nonfiction, but we'll call like philosophy as a general category something that I'm interested in, that kind of thing. And there's also, you know, plenty of more things besides. That's not really worth getting into super much details here for this video, which means that what it really comes down to is that I'm a little bit surprised by how much there was included in this list. Despite not owning a ton of nonfiction physically, there is plenty that I have digitally, tons more books that I might have been slightly more inclined to include in this list if I was more not as inclined to show things that I actually own a physical copy of. So, you know, there's plenty of nonfiction that I want to read. I just am very bad about prioritizing it. So maybe that's something that I can try to do like next year or something, is to include a nonfiction book or two here now and again. That would be probably a good thing to try, but we'll see. I always have much higher expectations of myself than I'm ultimately able to follow through it. So who knows what could possibly happen. But in either case, I appreciate you guys for watching this video. If you did, what are some particular nonfiction books that you have read recently that you really enjoyed? Especially if you are a fantasy reader, I'd be curious just to kind of see what kind of overlap there might be in some of those interests, or otherwise some nonfiction books that you specifically have an eye on that maybe I don't really know about. I'd be curious to hear more. So thank you one final time for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.